The smoke was so thick they could barely see their hands in front of their faces. Flames tore through the upper floors of the old warehouse on Meridian Street, painting the night sky in orange and red. Every firefighter on the scene had been ordered back. The building was going to collapse. Everyone could feel it. The deep, groaning shudder of steel giving way to heat, the crack of timber splitting under pressure that had no mercy. Everyone retreated, except the dog. A large Belgian Malinois stood at the base of the building's side entrance, barking with everything he had. Not the bark of a frightened animal, not panic, something else entirely, something desperate, focused, and impossibly deliberate. His handler, Captain Marcus Holt, grabbed his collar. The dog pulled back harder. "Atlas, heel!" Marcus shouted over the roar of the fire. "Heel!" Atlas didn't heel. He turned and looked at Marcus with eyes that seemed to say something. Words never could, and then he lunged back toward the burning door. No one expected what happened next. Before we go any further, if you're new here, make sure to hit like and subscribe. These stories take a lot of heart to tell, and your support means everything. And I'm genuinely curious, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Calloway Falls was the kind of town that most people drove through without stopping. Tucked between two low mountain ridges in the rural Pacific Northwest, it had a single main street, a diner that still used paper menus, and a volunteer fire department that had served the community for over 60 years. The warehouse on Meridian Street, an old textile mill that had sat vacant for nearly a decade, was the largest structure in town. 3 stories of aging brick, broken windows patched with plywood, and a roof that leaked every winter without fail. Nobody had used it in years. Or so everyone thought. It was the 3rd week of October when the fire started. Autumn had arrived early that year, stripping the trees bare and dropping temperatures into the low 30s before most people had even pulled out their winter coats. The nights were long and sharp and silent in a way that made sounds carry farther than they should. The howl of wind through the valley, the distant bark of a farm dog, the crack of a branch under the weight of early frost. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. By the time the first engine arrived on Meridian Street, the east wing of the warehouse was already fully engulfed. Flames poured from the second-floor windows like water running uphill. The air smelled of burning wood and something else, something chemical, acrid, wrong. The kind of smell that told experienced firefighters this wasn't going to be a simple job. Captain Marcus Holt arrived in the second vehicle 4 minutes behind the first engine. He was out of the truck before it fully stopped. Atlas was with him, as always. Marcus Holt was 43 years old, and he had been fighting fires for 21 of those years. He'd started as a volunteer at age 22, fresh out of a failed attempt at community college and a brief, miserable stint working at a lumber yard outside of Portland. He hadn't planned on becoming a firefighter. He'd shown up one afternoon to help sandbag a neighbor's property during a flash flood warning and found himself running alongside the county crew for 6 straight hours without thinking twice about it. By the time the water receded and the crew chief shook his hand and said, "You got good instincts, kid," Marcus had already made up his mind. He never looked back. 2 decades had given him a body that moved with quiet authority, broad-shouldered, deliberate. The kind of calm that came not from never having been afraid, but from having learned to act despite the fear. He had a jaw that seemed carved from the same stone as the mountains around Calloway Falls, and eyes that were a pale, watchful gray, the color of sky just before a storm rolls in. He had been married once. Claire had lasted 4 years before she told him, gently but honestly, that she couldn't compete with a calling. It wasn't that she didn't love him. It was that she'd slowly come to understand that a part of Marcus would always belong to something she couldn't touch, couldn't reason with, couldn't ask to come home at a reasonable hour and leave work at the door. Some people were built for ordinary lives. Marcus Holt was not one of them. They parted without bitterness. She moved to Seattle. He stayed in Calloway Falls. They still exchanged Christmas cards. He had no children, no pets, until Atlas, the Belgian Malinois, had come to him 3 years ago through the county's K-9 retirement program, not as a working partner in the traditional sense, but as a fire investigation dog. Atlas was trained to detect accelerants, trace the origins of suspicious fires, alert to the presence of people in smoke-filled structures. He was 6 years old when Marcus took him in, already seasoned, already bearing the calm focus of a dog who had seen things that most animals never would. Their bond had grown slowly, the way most real things do. Marcus was not a demonstrative man. He didn't talk to Atlas the way some handlers did. Baby talk, exaggerated praise, treats for breathing. He treated the dog the way he treated the men and women on his crew, with respect, with clear expectation, with unwavering backup when it counted. And Atlas, in turn, had given Marcus something he hadn't known he was missing. Something to come home to. Something that waited by the door. Something that understood, without a single word being spoken, when a day had been hard. The night of the Meridian Street fire was the hardest night they'd had in years. The evacuation order came 18 minutes after the first engine arrived. Structural assessment was bad. The east wing had collapsed partially into the second floor, and the fire was spreading west at a rate that told the incident commander, a 20-year veteran named Ruth Okafor, that they were not going to save the building. They were going to protect the surrounding structures, control the perimeter, and keep everyone alive. Pull back. Ruth's voice cut through the noise on the radio. All units, pull back to the outer perimeter. Do not enter the structure. Repeat, do not enter. Marcus was already at the side entrance when the order came through. He had brought Atlas around the building's perimeter as part of a standard sweep, looking for signs of arson, watching for anyone who might be loitering, taking note of anything that seemed off. It was routine. It was careful. It was the kind of thing most people didn't see and didn't think about. The quiet discipline underneath the chaos. Atlas had been moving steadily, nose to the ground, calm and methodical. And then he stopped, right at the building's south side entrance. A heavy metal door that had been left ajar, barely 2 inches, just enough to let out a thin ribbon of smoke. Atlas stopped, and his entire body changed. His ears went forward. His hackles rose, not all the way, not the full ridge of aggression, but partway. The halfway point, the point that Marcus had learned over 3 years meant something very specific, not danger to himself, danger to someone else. Atlas. Marcus kept his voice low and steady. What is it, boy? The dog pressed his nose to the gap in the door and inhaled once, long and slow. Then he sat, hard and deliberate, the trained, alert position that meant, I found something, right here. This is real. Marcus felt the cold move through him that had nothing to do with the October night. He keyed his radio. Command, this is Holt. I'm at the south entrance with Atlas. He's alerting. Possible occupant. Ruth's voice came back immediately. Holt, I need you to pull back. Building's compromised. Copy that. Atlas is a hard alert. I need 60 seconds. A pause, the kind of pause that meant someone was doing math they didn't want to do. 60 seconds, Holt. Then you're out. Marcus crouched down beside Atlas and looked at the door. The smoke pouring from the gap was thick and dark, not the pale gray of clean combustion, but the black-tinged roll of something synthetic burning alongside the wood. Toxic, the kind of air that shut down lungs in minutes rather than hours. He pulled the door open. The heat that hit him was like a wall. Atlas didn't wait. He pushed through before Marcus could grab his collar. Atlas, heel! The dog didn't heel. Marcus pulled on his breathing apparatus, squared his shoulders, and followed his dog into the burning building. The interior of the south wing was, for the moment, navigable. The fire was concentrated on the east side and the floors above. Here, near the south entrance, the smoke was heavy, but the flames were still distant. Visible at the far end of the corridor is a pulsing orange glow that threw long, dancing shadows down the hallway. The ceiling groaned. Somewhere above them, something shifted with a sound like a giant exhaling. They had minutes. Maybe less. Atlas moved with absolute certainty. He didn't sniff along the walls the way he did during methodical searches. He moved in a straight line, head up, cutting through the smoke as if he could see something Marcus couldn't. His nails clicked against the concrete floor in a rhythm that was almost urgent. not running but faster than a walk, pulled forward by something invisible. Marcus followed, one hand trailing the wall, counting steps, memorizing turns. They went left at the first junction, right at the second, down a half flight of stairs into what appeared to be a sub-level storage area. Lower than the main floor, the air fractionally thinner here, the roar of the fire slightly more distant. The space was large and dark, lit only by the beam of Marcus's helmet light sweeping in arcs ahead of them. Old shelving units, broken pallets, the skeleton of a wooden crate that had collapsed under its own weight years ago. Atlas pulled left again, toward the far corner, behind a row of shelving that had fallen partially sideways, creating an accidental lean-to of wood and wire mesh. And then Marcus heard it. Faint, barely audible through the roar of the fire above and the wheeze of his own breathing through the apparatus. A cough. Small. Weak. Human. Hello. Marcus's voice was muffled by the breathing mask. He pulled the mask aside for 1 second, just one, and shouted into the dark. Fire department. Is someone in here? Silence. Then, so quiet he almost missed it. Here. Marcus moved. He shoved the fallen shelving aside with his shoulder, the metal screeching against the floor in a sound that set his teeth on edge. Atlas pushed through beside him, tail up now, whole body vibrating with the urgency that the dog communicated better than any alarm system ever built. Behind the shelving, huddled against the base of the wall with her knees pulled to her chest and her arms wrapped around herself, was a girl. She looked to be about 7 or 8 years old. She was wearing a pink jacket that was now grey with soot. Her dark hair was matted against her forehead. Her eyes were barely open. The slow, heavy-lidded look of someone whose oxygen had been compromised for too long. But she was breathing. She was breathing. Atlas sat beside her immediately. He pressed his body gently against her side. Not in play, not in excitement, but in the careful, deliberate way that seemed to communicate. I've got you. I found you. You're not alone anymore. The girl's hand came up, almost reflexively, and found the dob's fur. She held on. I've got you, Marcus said, already moving, already scooping her up. I've got you, sweetheart. Can you hear me? You're okay. We're going to get you out. Her eyes opened fully for one moment and found his. The dog, she whispered. The dog came first. Yeah, Marcus said, his voice tight with something he didn't have time to name. Yeah, he always does. He keyed his radio. Command, this is Holt. I have a juvenile female, conscious but compromised. I'm in the sub-level south storage. Coming out the south entrance. Have medical standing by. Ruth's voice came back, and even through the static Marcus could hear the emotion she was fighting to keep out of it. Copy that, Holt. Medical is ready. Get out of there. Now. Getting out was harder than getting in. The corridor that had been navigable 4 minutes ago was worse now. The fire had moved. Smoke pressed lower. Marcus moved with the girl pressed against his chest. One arm locked under her, the other trailing the wall. Atlas moved ahead, always ahead, never behind, as if he knew the way back better than Marcus did. He did know the way. He led them straight to the south entrance without hesitation. When the door opened and the October night hit them, cold and clean and impossibly sweet, Marcus felt his legs almost give out with relief. He didn't let them. He walked the 15 feet to the waiting paramedics, handed the girl off with steady hands, and then stood very still for a moment while the world tilted slightly around him. Atlas pressed against his leg. Marcus put his hand on the dog's head. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. The girl's name was Lily Marchetti. She was 8 years old, and she had been inside that warehouse for nearly 7 hours. The story that emerged over the following days was one that made the quiet town of Calloway Falls go very still, in the way that communities do when something has happened that doesn't fit inside the frame of ordinary life. Lily had not wandered into the warehouse by accident. She had been taken there. The investigation began even before the fire was fully out. The county fire marshal's office arrived at 4 in the morning, 2 investigators in a white van. moving through the perimeter with the deliberate calm of people who had learned long ago not to let urgency make them careless. They would not have access to the building until the following afternoon, when structural teams had cleared it as safe to enter. But they were already taking photographs, already interviewing witnesses, already beginning the slow, methodical construction of what had really happened on Meridian Street. Marcus was still at the scene when the investigators arrived. He'd been checked by the paramedics. His lungs were clear, his vitals were steady, and Ruth Okafor had told him 3 times to go home. He hadn't gone home. He couldn't yet. Something kept him there, standing at the perimeter with Atlas at his side, watching the building smolder in the gray pre-dawn light. Detective Carla Voss arrived at 6 a.m. She was from the county sheriff's office, assigned to crimes against children, a title that no one who held it had ever chosen lightly. She was a compact woman in her late 30s with sharp brown eyes and the kind of practical stillness that Marcus recognized as belonging to people who had spent too many years seeing the worst people could do to each other and had decided, in the aftermath, to be very deliberate about everything. She had already been to the hospital. She had already spoken to Lily's mother, a woman named Sandra Marchetti, who had spent the night in a kind of terror that had no language adequate to describe it, who had filed a missing person report at 4 p.m. the previous afternoon when Lily hadn't come home from school, who had spent 7 hours calling Lily's name into a phone that rang and rang and rang. "Captain Holt," Voss said, extending her hand. "Detective." He shook it. "You've been to see Lily?" "Just came from the hospital." Voss's eyes didn't give much away, but something moved in them. Something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, but lived in the territory between the two. "She's stable. Going to be okay, physically. The rest is going to take time." Marcus nodded. He looked at Atlas, who was watching Voss with his usual calm attention. The measuring look of a dog who was always assessing, always reading. "She told us something," Voss said after a moment, when she was coherent enough to talk. "About the fire." Marcus waited. "She said it wasn't an accident." The words landed in the cold morning air like stones dropped in still water. "Not an accident," she said. Voss paused, glancing down at her notes, then back up. "She said the man who brought her there told her the fire was going to happen. He told her it was going to look like an accident. He said that if anyone came sking, they would think it was a vagrant who'd broken in and started a cooking fire. He told her no one would ever know she'd been there." Marcus felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. "He planned it," Marcus said. "He planned it," Voss confirmed, "and he was very nearly right. If your dog hadn't alerted at that door—" She stopped, shook her head. "We're talking about a different kind of morning." Atlas, as if understanding, made a low sound in his chest. Not quite a whine, not quite a growl. Something in between, the sound of a dog who knew things that the people around him were only just beginning to understand. "Tell me about the alert," Voss said. Marcus told her everything. The perimeter sweep, the stop at the south entrance, the hard sit, the trained alert. The way Atlas had moved through the building with a certainty that Marcus had learned over 3 years to trust completely. Voss listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked at the dog for a long moment. "He found her in a sub-level storage area," she said. "That was not visible from any entrance, not on the building schematic. It's not on the public record of the building's layout at all." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "The sub-level," Voss said quietly, "was added to this building in the 1970s. Off-book. It doesn't appear on the original permits. Most people don't know it exists." She paused, which means whoever put Lily there knew the building well enough to know about a room that wasn't on any official record. Something enormous shifted in the air between them. "Someone who'd been in that building before," Marcus said. "Someone with a specific kind of knowledge," Voss agreed. They both looked at the still smoldering wreck of the old textile mill on Meridian Street. Atlas pressed against Marcus's leg. The dog was still watching the building. His ears were forward. He wasn't done. The fire marshal's report came back 48 hours later. The cause of the fire had been confirmed as deliberate. 2 separate ignition points. one in the east wing near a bank of old electrical panels, one in a storage closet on the second floor west side. Both showed evidence of an accelerant. Both had been set with a precision that spoke of planning rather than impulse. The accelerant, the investigators noted, was unusual. Not gasoline, not lighter fluid, a commercial-grade compound used in industrial cleaning, the kind available only through specific trade suppliers, the kind that left a chemical signature identifiable under spectral analysis, the kind that Atlas was trained to detect. It had been enough, just barely, for him to catch it through that 2-inch gap in the south entrance door. 2 inches. The gap that Lily's captor had not fully closed when he left. The single mistake that had cost him everything. Voss and her team pooled the building's history. The Calloway Falls textile mill had operated until 1998, when the last owner, a man named Gerald Fontes, had sold it to a development company that had then gone bankrupt before any development occurred. The building had passed through 2 more ownership transfers in the years since, neither of which had resulted in actual use. Its current owner was a holding company registered in Delaware. A shell, the investigators quickly established, behind which was a single individual. A man named Trevor Boast. Boast was 41 years old. He had grown up in Calloway Falls, left at 18, spent 20 years building what appeared, on the surface, to be a successful career in commercial real estate. He'd returned 18 months ago, quietly, without announcing himself to anyone who remembered him. He had a record. Sealed. From when he was a juvenile, the details required a court order to access. Voss got the court order. She read what was inside. Her jaw tightened in the way that Marcus had come to recognize as her telling herself to stay steady. Trevor Boast, at age 15, had been arrested for the abduction of a 9-year-old girl in a neighboring county. The charges had been reduced. He'd served time in a juvenile facility. He'd been released at 18. The record had been sealed when he turned 21. He had been back in Calloway Falls for 18 months. In that time, no one had known who he was. No one had known what he'd done. Until Atlas stood at a 2-inch gap in a metal door in the middle of the night and refused, absolutely refused, to walk away. They found Trevor Boast at a motel 30 miles north of Calloway Falls on the morning of the 3rd day. He was in room 14, with a bag packed, a burner phone on the table, and a one-way bus ticket to Seattle that he had purchased with cash. He had been 20 minutes from walking out the door when Voss knocked. He answered it. He looked at the detective and the 2 deputies behind her, and something in his face, some last fragile architecture of denial, collapsed. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He sat down on the edge of the motel bed and put his hands in his lap and seemed, in that moment, to become suddenly and terribly small. "Lily's alive," Voss said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an offer of comfort. It was something colder, a door closing. Boast closed his eyes. "I didn't," he started. "Stop." Voss's voice was calm and absolute. "You have the right to remain silent. I strongly encourage you to use it." He was transported to the county jail that afternoon. At the press conference that evening, Sheriff Tom Aldridge stood at a podium in front of a gathered crowd of reporters and residents, and he said the words that Calloway Falls needed to hear. Lily Marchetti was safe. She was home. The suspect was in custody. The investigation was ongoing. He also said something else. He said that the child had been found by a dog, a Belgian Malinois named Atlas, partner to Captain Marcus Holt of the Calloway Falls Fire Department, who had alerted to a survivor's presence inside a burning structure against direct evacuation orders, who had led his handler through smoke and heat and structural compromise to a hidden sub-level room that appeared on no official record, and who had stayed beside an 8-year-old girl in the dark and the smoke until help arrived. The crowd was quiet for a moment. Then someone started to clap. It spread the way real things spread, not because anyone decided to, but because anyone decided to, but because everyone felt it at once. The particular, wordless release of a community that had been holding its breath for 3 days and had finally been given permission to exhale. Marcus Holt stood at the back of the crowd with Atlas at his side. He did not go to the podium. He didn't need to. He looked down at Atlas, and Atlas looked up at him, and Marcus thought about a 2-inch gap and a metal door in the middle of the night. He thought about a dog who stopped when everything in the situation said to keep moving, who sat when every alarm in the building was telling them to run, who knew, who had simply, unequivocally, without doubt or hesitation or the need for explanation, known. "Good boy," Marcus said quietly. Atlas whined once, slow, dignified, and entirely certain of himself. Lily Marchetti spent 4 days in the hospital. Her lungs had sustained some damage from the smoke, but the doctors were cautiously optimistic. She was young. She was otherwise healthy, and she had been found in time. The oxygen she'd lost in that sub-level room had left her confused and weak, but it had not left her broken. She remembered everything. That was both a gift and a burden, and Sandra Marchetti understood, with the particular wisdom of a mother who had spent 3 nights sleeping in a hospital chair, that her daughter was going to need time and care and the kind of patient, consistent presence that love sometimes demanded above everything else. What Lily talked about most, in those first days, was the dog. He came before the man, she told her mother. The fire was so loud, I couldn't hear anything. And then, I felt him. Before I saw him, he just pressed against me, like he was saying, "You're okay now." Sandra Marchetti did not trust herself to speak for a moment. "He didn't bark at me," Billy continued, with the careful precision of a child who wants to get the details exactly right. "He just stayed, like he was going to stay no matter what." Sandra nodded. She held her daughter's hand and nodded. On the 4th day, Lily was discharged from the hospital. On the 5th day, Marcus Holt brought Atlas to the Marchetti house. It was Sandra who had called him, hesitantly, half apologetically, explaining that Lily had been asking, and she understood if it was too much trouble, and she didn't want to impose. But Marcus had stopped her. "We'll be there at 2, he said. The meeting between Lily and Atlas was not what Marcus had expected. He had anticipated something big, something tearful and cinematic, the kind of reunion that people filmed and posted online, all overwhelm and exclamation. He was not a cynical man, but he had been in emergency services long enough to know that real moments rarely looked the way people imagined they would. He was right. It was not big. It was quiet. Lily came to the door in pajamas and socks, her hair still a little wild, her eyes still carrying the shadow of something she would carry for a while. She looked at Atlas, and Atlas looked at her. He sat. The same sit. Hard, deliberate. The trained alert that meant, "I found something. Right here. This is real." And Lily, 8 years old, 4 days out of the hospital, still carrying the weight of something a child should never have to carry, walked forward and put her arms around his neck and buried her face in his fur. Atlas stayed completely still. He let her hold on for as long as she needed. Marcus stood on the front porch with Sandra Marchetti, and they were both quiet for a moment that felt like it had some kind of weight to it, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. "I don't know how to thank you," Sandra said finally. "You don't have to," Marcus said. He watched Atlas with Lily in the yard, the dog still sitting, still steady, the girl's arms still around his neck. He found her. "I just followed." Sandra shook her head slowly. "That's not a small thing," she said. "Following when everything tells you to go the other way." Marcus thought about that for a moment. He thought about the 2-inch gap, about the cold moving through him when he heard that cough from behind the shelving. About the way Atlas had moved through that smoke-filled corridor with such absolute, unshakable certainty. "No," he said quietly. "I guess it's not." Trevor Boast was formally charged 12 days later. The charges included criminal confinement of a minor, aggravated arson, and attempted murder. Additional charges were pending as investigators continued to build the case. The sealed juvenile record was unsealed by court order as part of the proceedings. The story of what Boast had done at 15 and what he had very nearly done again at 41 became part of the public record in Calloway Falls. The town processed it the way small towns process difficult truths, slowly, painfully, and together. There were community meetings, there were hard conversations, there were people who said they'd seen something off about Boast but hadn't trusted their instinct, and others who said they hadn't noticed anything at all. And the gap between those two things was one that the community would sit with for a long time. At the county commissioners' meeting in November, a resolution was passed recognizing Atlas for his actions on the night of October the 21st. Marcus attended the meeting in his dress uniform. Atlas attended in his vest. When the commissioner read the resolution aloud, the details of the alert, the search, the recovery, the room was the kind of quiet that happens when people are moved and are trying to be composed about it. When it was done, the commissioner looked at Atlas. Atlas looked back at the commissioner with the patient, level gaze of a dog who had heard many things said about him and had formed his own conclusions about all of them. "Is there anything you'd like to say, Captain Holt?" the commissioner asked. Marcus considered the question for a moment. He did what he was trained to do, Marcus said. He did what his nature told him to do. He found someone who needed finding, and he stayed until help arrived. He looked down at Atlas. "I think that's about all any of us can ask of each other." The room was quiet again. Then, someone, the same someone maybe, or a different one, it didn't matter, started to clap. The story did not end there. Stories like this rarely do. 6 weeks after the fire, Carlos called Marcus from a number he didn't recognize. "It's Voss. I'm on a personal phone." A pause. "Are you somewhere you can talk?" He was in his kitchen. Atlas was on the floor beside him, chewing something that Marcus preferred not to examine too closely. "I'm here," Marcus said. "We've been going through Boast's financial records," Voss said. Her voice was careful, the way it got when she was carrying something heavy. "The holding company that owned the warehouse, the one registered in Delaware. Yeah, it's not just him." 3 words. The cold moved through Marcus again. The same cold, the same place behind his sternum. "There are other names on the company filings," Voss continued. "We've been tracing them. 2 are deceased. 1 is in another state, under investigation for something unrelated, but related if you understand what I mean." Another pause. "The 4th name, we've had trouble with it. The paperwork routes through 3 different countries." "But you found it," Marcus said. "We found it," Voss said. And then she told him the name. Marcus sat very still. Atlas raised his head and looked at him. The measuring look, the assessing look, the look that Marcus had come to recognize as the dog checking his temperature, gauging the room. The name Voss had said was not a stranger. It was someone in Calloway Falls, someone that Marcus had spoken to at the commissioners' meeting 6 weeks ago, someone who had started to clap. Some things cannot be hidden forever, not from a dog who has learned to trust what his nose tells him more than anything his eyes can see, not from the quiet, patient intelligence that lives in a creature who has no reason to lie and every reason to be loyal. Atlas had stood at a 2-inch gap in a metal door in the middle of the night, and he had refused to walk away. He had known. He had stayed. And in staying, in that single stubborn, impossible act of refusal, he had changed everything. Not just for Lily, not just for Calloway Falls, but for whatever was still to come, because some stories don't end. They only deepen. Stay with us. Because what Voss told Marcus that night, and what happened in the days that followed, will leave you speechless.